Hey there.
Hi, how's it going?
It's going pretty good. Do you have time for an interview?
An interview?
Mm-hmm.
What's it about?
I'm practicing street epistemology.
What is that?
Yeah, it's a weird word.
Yes, it is.
Street just kind of means going on the street and asking people to stop and question why they think something is true and how they're so sure.
Cool.
But it doesn't normally happen that way. Usually it's sort of like you're with friends and family, somebody makes a claim, and you're like, that's interesting, is that true? And then you can engage with them to see, like if they say they think ghosts are real,
Yeah.
you could be like, well, what do you mean by ghosts? Why do you think ghosts are real? How did you determine that reason justifies being so sure?
Yeah.
And I try to encourage the person to pick the topic. So like if you don't think ghosts are real, I'd rather not talk about it.
Right.
But if you really think something else is true and you behave differently because of it, it could be a really fun exercise to be a mirror to your views and respectfully challenge how you're so sure that it's real.
Ooh.
Do you want to do a short, 4-minute interview?
4 minutes? Oh, gosh. Okay, sure.
Can we stand in the shade a little?
Yeah.
And I have a camera up there to record if that's... Are you okay with that?
That's fine.
What's your first name?
Sydney.
It's very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
My name is Anthony.
Nice to meet you.
All right, I'm going to just jot down your name. S-I?
S-Y.
Okay.
D-N-E-E.
Sydney.
Yes.
Great. My name is Anthony, and you're okay if I record?
Yeah.
Okay. At the end, if you're uncomfortable with it, let me know. I won't use it.
Okay.
I'll give you a card.
Cool.
I'll actually also give you something else. At the end of the conversation, I want to offer you one of these 3 pieces as a gift.
Cool.
To perhaps incentivize you to come back for the other 2.
Okay.
Because it's not hard for me to get somebody to stop and do one short talk.
Right.
What I'm looking for this semester is to do multiple conversations, preferably on the same topic,
Right.
where we can track your progress of your certainty over time. Because I will ask pretty challenging questions.
Right.
So even if you're absolutely,
I'm a little
listen, I
nervous.
know that this is true. There's
Yeah.
no question in my mind. I'm
Yeah.
100% sure. We literally could have 3 conversations and you may completely abandon that view.
That sounds fun. Sounds interesting.
Yeah. Sometimes people are a little intimidated at that possibility.
I definitely, it's a little nerve-wracking, but I'm here.
I'm completely willing to move at whatever speed, pace you're comfortable doing.
Cool.
So if I ask 3 questions, you're like, I'm just not comfortable with this, let me know, we'll end it.
Okay.
There's no obligation
Sounds cool.
for this interview or the other 2, whatever. Just be blunt, be honest. And
Okay.
if you don't know how to answer something, say, I need some time to think about it. It's completely fine.
Does it matter the topic?
In a way it does,
Okay.
in that if you, let's say you want to talk about recycling and you think paper bags are better than plastic,
Yeah.
but you don't really care one way or the other,
Okay, so it has
Then
to be something I care about?
ideally,
Okay.
or something that you think is true.
Okay, cool.
It could also be something that maybe you've been questioning, you've been puzzling about a little bit. You've been like, I've always been told this is true, I've always
Yeah.
thought it. And now that I'm here at school, I'm starting to take another look at things. We can
Okay.
take something like that too.
Okay, cool. So I think that gender is not binary.
Aha. I've always been wanting to do this talk. I don't think I've ever done this topic.
Cool.
Okay. Your view is gender is not a
non-binary.
yes-no. It's not male-female. It's
Right.
not a 0 or a 1.
Correct.
Okay. I'm going to jot that down. If it's not binary, what is it?
I think that it's fluid. I kind of have 2 takes on it. So one is that people can fluctuate between masculine and feminine, and that it shouldn't really have a title. But I think that the second part is that some people prefer a title, and the title doesn't really matter.
Before we go any further, are there any particular pronouns that I should be aware of?
So I use she, her pronouns.
I use he, him.
Okay, cool.
Okay. A lot of people don't agree with your stance. What would you say if someone said, I don't think that that's true, you
Right.
do, why do you actually think that that's the case?
Yeah.
What reason would you give for thinking that that's the case? And then maybe we can actually revisit your claim a little bit too if I'm confused, but I think I get it.
Yeah. So 2 things. One, I think that gender and sex gets misconstrued. So I do see sex as male, female, but I don't see gender because I think gender is more of a socially constructed topic. And then secondly, I feel like gender isn't binary because since it is a socially constructed topic, it's up to the person as to how they see themselves. And it's
Okay.
not up to us as to how we see them.
I got you. In your view, gender is a social construct, and because it is, in your view, then people can identify as whatever gender they want.
Correct.
What would be an equivalent social construct equivalent to gender.
Right.
Like, what are we talking about? Can you think of something similar?
So kind of like introvert, extrovert. That would be the first thing that comes to my mind is saying like, I may see someone as an introvert, but they may see themselves as an extrovert, and it's not up to me. And people kind of fluctuate on that spectrum to where they're not they might not necessarily be 100% introvert or 100% extrovert. Just like some people may not feel 100% feminine or 100% masculine.
Okay, so let's say you have a best friend, and I'm gonna go with they.
Okay.
They think that they're an introvert. Yet every time you run into them, they're dancing around.
Yeah.
They're parading around in very flashy clothing, and they're the first one to raise their hand when the teacher asks them a question.
Right.
All of their actions seem to indicate that they're an extrovert.
Right.
Yet they identify as an introvert.
Yeah.
If that person asked you how you classify them,
Right.
how would you respond?
Yeah. I mean, I think being honest with what I would probably respond was like, yeah, I see you as an extrovert. But at the end of the day, like if they tell me that they're an introvert, I have no right to say like, no, you're not, because that's their lived experience. And like at the end of the day, that's how they take in the world. And like when they go home and they're by themselves, like you don't know what signs they may be showing of being an introvert.
Okay, so what I think I hear you saying, I forgot to set the timer for 4 minutes. I'm sorry.
You're good.
We can cut it at any time.
Yeah, you're good.
What I think I hear you saying is that even if it's my experience that this person is an extrovert, like by every sense of their action, they're always extroverting.
Right.
Is that a word? And yet, if they say, "Listen, I'm an introvert," and I would respectfully ask that you identify me as such.
Right.
You would respect their wishes.
Yes.
Even if you really thought that they were extroverted.
Yes. I think that sometimes it's a process in respecting that and like showing that to them. But I think that it's just the intent of trying to do so. So like I might, let's say like I'm the teacher and they tell me that. I might still like look to them to answer questions at first, but if they're saying like, oh, I only do that because, like I only answer questions first because no one else spoke, then that makes it different. You know what I mean? Like you don't really know the reason why people are acting one way or another. And if your intention is just to respect what they would, like how they wish that you would treat them, then like that aids in the process.
I follow you. That person dancing around the courtyard, we may interpret that as extroversion, but that might be the way that an introvert acts when they're nervous in public or something, right? Like, okay. So from what I understand, when it comes to social constructs, whatever a person thinks is the case goes.
Yes.
Are you saying that?
For the most part. I think there are some things.
Is there any limit to that?
Yes.
Tell me about it.
So like race. For me, race is a social construct because...
Race is as well.
Yes, because... How do I put this? You're taught to like classify things, like classify people, classify objects. So like race was used as like a classification in order to push like an agenda. So like way back when people weren't like, oh, they're black, they're white, they're brown. Like people were just people a long, long time ago.
How long ago were we talking about? And where?
That's a good question. Okay, so like early in Europe, there used to be the Moors, right? And the Moors were black Europeans, but they weren't called black because there wasn't like a social stratification between the two. It was just like this is an ethnicity almost.
Are you saying that they didn't look at color, they just looked at where you came from?
No, I'm saying they looked at where you came from, they somewhat looked at color, but it wasn't classified as race of like, so like let's say you were a Moor in Europe, you were called a Moor, but if you were black in another country, you were called something else. You know what I mean? So it wasn't based on just skin color. It was based on country of origin, things like that. So for me now, like let's say you see an African American born in America and you see an African born in Africa, they're both black. Or you see a Mexican American who appears very dark and is black passing, they're considered black.
I think what I hear you saying is that what we would call race is changing over time.
Right. And I think but I also think that that's something, even though it's created, like it's a social construct, that's something that is not necessarily as fluid. So there's
Not as
some
fluid as gender?
as gender, right? So like
How is it different?
so let's say for certain minority groups, like you can be black, you can be mixed, you can be of like Latin descent, but you can be white passing, so appear as white in public, and people perceive you as white. So even though you may identify, oh,
Please.
even though you may identify as like being of Latin descent, people may identify you as white, and so that's where it's like, yes, you get to stand confident in like your lived experience. So like that person, I would still identify as like of Latin descent if that's what they told me that they were. But at the same time, they don't get to choose the next day like, oh, okay, now I'm black, like for today.
There's less fluidity when it comes to race as opposed to gender?
Right, just because of like perception. And you know what? As I'm talking, I'm like, not really. Because I just feel like with gender, there's fluidity in how you express it. So like even if I identify like as a cisgendered woman, tomorrow I can dress in all male clothing and still feel like a cisgendered woman. But if I identify as black right now and I come in here tomorrow with what would be like traditional Mexican attire, I'm not going to identify as Mexican. Like I'm going to stay true to like my identity the same way I do in gender.
You're saying that you're incapable of doing that.
Right.
Could there be an individual who, I'm wondering about myself actually now. Like I think if you were to ask me how I identify myself, I would say I'm a middle-aged Caucasian American of Italian and German and Polish descent or something like that.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying is that I couldn't show up tomorrow and identify as a Hispanic.
But I think that...
Is that what you're saying, or could I?
No,
is it fluid enough where I actually could do that if I thought that it was true?
Right, and I think the question that like you raised about relating it to gender was interesting to me because I thought of them as separate things, but at the end of the day, like with both of them, I feel like while identity throughout your lifetime is like being developed, at the same time it doesn't usually fluctuate day to day. So like I said, even if I like identify
are you talking about gender still? Is
gender and race? So
gender
like,
and race maybe doesn't fluctuate as much as you once thought that it did prior to the talk?
More so like gender and race aren't as different in concept as what I perceived before.
Okay.
So saying like if I see myself like as a cisgendered black woman today, no matter how I'm perceived outside or how I dress tomorrow, I'm still gonna feel that way. Let's say even if you show up tomorrow in a traditional female Mexican garment, you are still going to perceive yourself the way that you did today.
Could I wear the exact same attire that I'm wearing today? Could I wear that tomorrow and identify as a female Hispanic?
I think if something changed in event, so like let's say tonight you talk to a parent
let's
or
say I watched a really
and,
powerful documentary on their struggle and it really resonated with me.
Yeah.
Would you accept my stance and identify? Would you be willing to agree with me that?
See, and that's where I think my initial thought about race and gender were a little bit like separate in saying that in gender, and maybe this is just because of my perception on race and gender, but if gender you came in tomorrow and said like, hey, I identify as a woman and I prefer she, her pronouns, I'd be like, okay.
You'd roll with it.
Right. But if it were like, hey, you know, I have Italian, German, and Polish descent, but I identify as Mexican today, I think there would be more thought behind like, okay, well then how do you identify with that if that's not in your background, if you don't have a connection to the culture, like, you know?
What I think I hear you saying is that if I were to disclose to you that I'm now a different gender, I'm self-identifying as a female.
Right.
Tomorrow, you'd roll with it.
Right.
If I said I'm a Hispanic female tomorrow, you wouldn't as readily accept the claim.
I don't think so. And I think that that's a lot because of the fact that race is like so visible in saying that like not ethnicity but like race, so saying like
distinctions,
right, so like as
characteristics,
far as, like, yes, so if, and that's even the distinction between like within minority groups is that there's all like black people of all backgrounds, some are white passing, some are more black passing, so like they may look more white or more black, and that affects how they're going to go through the world. So like people have the connection of saying like we're both black, but then also there's a lot of judgment over like, well, you don't look black, so how does that, and I think that that's kind of where my difference between race and gender comes in.
Yeah, so I think we actually been talking for a while, and I love the talk. It's freaking awesome. But I do think it could be healthy if we ended it so we can both process it and maybe come back for a second talk.
Cool.
And if we can pick it up again, and I'd love you to pick one of these three colors, whichever one you want. Okay. The idea here is that maybe we can pick it up again and talk about the difference between gender and race, and why it seems like you have two different parameters when deciding what is acceptable and what is not.
Cool.
That was fantastic.
Thanks.
Let me give you a card too.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions for me?
No. Thanks so much, Anthony. I appreciate it.
I'm really glad that you stopped.
Me too.
We stop people, we do this before the God test.
What?
Integration test, yeah.
I took the God test here about 3 years ago. It's on YouTube.
Yeah,
you may have seen it.
I don't know if I have, yeah. Who did do you remember who did it with you? Did they have someone film it?
I was filming it.
Oh, you filmed it?
I uploaded it, and it has like 500,000 views.
Dude,
you probably watched it.
So the guy that invented
You probably watched
the
it.
God test, he told me about you. Let's take a photo and send it to him.
Okay, let's do it.
Dr. Rice,
We'll do it with my phone too.